Hello, so we're having a look at secondary storage, and I'm joined in this presentation with Acebrook, who won't shut up. So I apologise if you hear any interjections. Okay, so we looked at main memory, so RAM and the working memory. Now we need to look at secondary storage, and that's where you're actually trying to store something for sort of long term or tomorrow or whatever, more than just keep that on my desk because I'll need that in a sec. It's more trying to store something. So firstly, what sort of things are we trying to store? Well, if you look on your phone and go into the storage, no doubt you'll find several things in there split into different categories, and you'll see a big chunk of that is the operating system. You'll find probably a huge chunk is photos and videos and your apps. But all sorts of things are stored on your computer. You probably got some skins and all the rest. The different widgets and all the rest, they're all just stored on the computer somewhere. So all that is stored in your secondary storage. Okay, so note comparing it to primary storage. So you wouldn't store it in primary storage because primary storage tends to be quite small. You tend to sort of 4-8 gig of primary storage. Say hello. So he just wanted to say hello. Okay, also you wouldn't store it in primary memory in RAM because you'd lose it after a reboot. It would be really shocking if you worked all those hours to get your high score and then you rebooted the computer and the high score was gone. That was actually how I started with gaming way back on sort of the Master System and the Spectrum. High scores wouldn't save. It was really annoying. And also RAM, you've not got much of it. It's used for other things. It's used for the stuff which is currently in use. You want to make best use of that storage. Kind of because it's a lot more expensive than other methods. Okay, so what methods are there of doing secondary storage? Well, there's magnetic stuff, there's optical stuff, and the solid state stuff. Those are the key ones you need to know. There's also cloud storage, which we'll get onto more, but it's a tricky one because is that really secondary storage? We'll discuss that more later. Okay, so magnetic. What do we mean by magnetic? Well, if you got a spinning hard drive, HDD, that is using magnetic storage. If you've got a floppy drive, and I've passed out floppy disks around the class before now, those are using magnetic storage, as are tapes. So they used to be used, still are in some places. In businesses you'll have tape backups usually, and they're all stored on magnetic media. Next one is optical. So your CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, all the rest are using optical media. And solid state, such as your SSDs in your computer, USB sticks, external solid state hard drives, all that sort of stuff comes under solid state and your SD cards. Okay, let's have a look at magnetic. Now, think about the science experiment you used to do with iron filings on a piece of paper and a magnet underneath. Imagine those iron filings are used to represent a bit, a 1 or a 0. If they're pointing away from the center, there'd be a 1. If they're perpendicular to the center, then that would be a 0. So you could arrange all those, loads of them, to represent 1s and 0s. And it's kind of similar on this. You've got the shiny disk, which you can see on the top right, And all along here, you've got little magnetic particles which are either that way or that way, depending on whether it represents a 1 or a 0. Chances are it's either sort of north is that way or north is that way or something like that. When you get that low level, you're kind of way beyond what we need to know. What we need to know is that it is stored by magnetic bits on there. This disk spins around, and this is the head. This is the bit which is reading the data, and now we'll just move along here, and because it's moving along there and the disk is moving, it can access all the data. It does mean if you got a bit of data over here, it needs to spin around to get there, but it does go about 7,200 RPM. It's typically split into tracks, so each ring is a track, and then you've got sectors, and then the computer will say, okay, read track 2, sector 5, and it'll say, okay, I'll read that bit, and it'll scan there and read all of that data in. And sometimes you have multiple platters. This is a platter, so this mirrored surface. You can have multiple of them stacked on top of each other, as this diagram shows. So you'd have a platter and a head, a platter and a head, and so on. So this is your read-write head and the arm. And this, the spindle, and the whole disk spins around the spindle. This is basically just a motor. The distance between this head and the disk is less than the thickness of a human hair. Which means if you sort of get some dust particles on there, it can scratch the disk to high heaven. Tip: don't open your hard drives. If you do, you do need to be taking precautions, and by precautions I mean a clean room or a air filter device. There's an awesome video by Lewis Rossman, I believe it is, where he's got a Mac repair shop and data recovery, and there's a few videos where he's actually gone through the process, opened up a hard drive, swapped out the arm and the motors which have failed into and got a new one in from a donor hard drive, put it all back together and got it all working. But he does use a huge, great air filter, so there's no particles in that, which is bigger than would cause issues on this. So if you start getting that dusty, your data's all gone. The next one we're looking at is optical storage. So CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, they all work with the same principle. If you have a look at this image, you can see there's a bit of a curve going around on that. So the center of the disk is going to be in this direction somewhere, but it's going to be quite far because this is really zoomed in. This is zoomed in ridiculous level. And what each of these are is burns with a laser beam. So where it's burnt some of the data, some bits aren't burnt. You know, a CD is really shiny. Well, light will reflect off these bits really easily. Won't reflect off that so easily. So essentially this spins around. A laser will be shone onto the disk. If it's shone on there, it will reflect straight back. Ooh, therefore that's a 0. If it's shone onto there, it won't bounce back. It will get distributed all over the place. Ooh, there's no light coming back. That will be a 1 then. And so on. So we'll just go along and it will see if there's data coming back or not. The whole thing is actually burnt into a spiral, whereas before you had concentric rings. So you had these rings going round. With a CD, it's in a spiral. So it's one continuous lot of data. Because when you're doing a CD, you're saying, okay, all this string of 1s and 0s, write it to the disk. As opposed to a hard drive, you're saying, I want some data from here, I want some data from there, put this data over here, and you're accessing things in a much more eclectic manner. As you're probably aware, CDs, you can only write to them once, but then you can read to them many times. The good thing about CDs is they're dirt cheap. They're so cheap that when you buy a movie, they give you a free Blu-ray. So the fact that they're using Blu-rays and DVDs and CDs on all of these things when you buy them is because the disc itself is so cheap they can churn out millions of them and they don't have to worry about the cost. If they were giving those movies on USB sticks cost a lot more, so you'd have to increase the prices a lot more. Next one, some of you with high-end computers may have one of these in your computer. Your phone will have some solid-state storage, USB sticks, SD cards, they're all using solid state. Now this is a lot newer technology. Hard drives have been around for ages and ages. Solid state in the forms which we're looking at it these days isn't really as common. So USB sticks started around 2000. So I think I got my first USB stick in about 2001, and when you plugged it into the computer, it didn't know what to do with it. It didn't come up as a drive. You had to install drivers. You had to carry around a floppy disk in order to use the USB stick. With Windows XP, I think we got the first USB sticks would automatically just work. So compare that to a hard drive, which has been going since I'd hate to think when, and they're fairly new, particularly in the capacities which we're looking at them today. I think the first one I had was probably 112 megabytes, if that, maybe 32 meg. Compared to the floppy disk we were using, that was fantastic. 1.44 megabytes, suddenly you can do 32 megabytes, is a huge increase. Now 32 gigabytes is basic. Okay, so solid state is using sort of flash memory. So it's using very similar to our primary storage. It's very similar to RAM, but it doesn't lose the data when the system is powered off. It's really fast, and part of that speed is because there's no moving parts. It just says, give me the data at this location, and then it can just grab it and return it. It doesn't need to spin a disk to get to the right place. And because there's no spinning disk, it's really quiet. And you don't require clunky mechanisms, motors and things like that. So it really has a lot of advantages. There were sort of Walkmans and things like that which used moving parts. So I had a portable CD player, I had a miniature one as well. And so you've got the disc moving around, you've got the laser moving, it's trying to read all the data, play your music, that's fine. If you're jogging or moving around, then it's causing issues and the disc is moving slightly, it's losing track of where it is, and your music skips like awful. Once you've got solid state, then you can go for a jog while listening to your music and it's not going to skip or anything. There are some limitations in that due to how it's working, it's only got a finite amount of writes. So once you've written to it a certain amount of times, it won't let you write to it again. And I'm not talking about the disk as a whole, I'm talking about the individual memory locations, but that is in a huge number these days, so the device itself will probably break before you hit that. It was certainly a consideration in the early days. Okay, cloud storage. You may use services like Dropbox, iCloud, OneDrive, things like that. And so you can consider cloud storage to be a secondary storage device. You can use it to store files which you want to save. You can then load them later. Therefore, secondary storage, right? Well, when you store some data on, say, Dropbox, what it's doing is it's transmitting it over the internet to their data center and then storing it on their computers. There's nothing magic and fancy going on. They've just got a computer, or, as you can see in this picture, rows and rows and rows and rows of them. Each computer here is probably about that much. So you've probably got about 20 computers in each of these blocks, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, probably about 8 deep. So 8 times 20 just in that block, then the same in that block, then the same in that block. You got lots of computers in a very small space. And each of those will be filled with probably hard drives, maybe SSDs, and that's storing all your data. So it's, despite the fact that you're using cloud storage, it's still using magnetic or solid state storage somewhere. You do kind of have to be careful with cloud storage. If you don't have internet, you've not got your data. It's a good thing or a bad thing. It means that I can go to anywhere in the world, say, oh, I need a file, go to the internet, and I can access my files, and that's really useful. But it does mean that if you have the internet connection issues, then suddenly you can't access any of your data. It does also mean that there's potentials for it to be hacked. So Dropbox managed to have a fantastic bug in their program, which I'm not letting them live down. And essentially, one day they didn't check the password. So you could have put anyone's username in, whatever password you like, and it would say, yep, that's right. So you could have got into anyone's account just by typing in their email address, and it would have let you in, and you could access it like it's your own. iCloud. So 2.6. Sorry about that, joys of working from home. So iCloud, they also had their issues. You may remember things about some celebrities. Well, what happened is that some hackers sent out some celebrities phishing emails. So some emails say, hi, I'm from Apple. You need to log into your account because something's gone wrong. Click here to log in. They click in, they get a page which looks very much like the iCloud login page, and they enter in their username and password and says, yep, awesome, that's all sorted. And then they store the username and password which the person put in, and then the hackers went in with those details and found some compromising images. So there are risks to using cloud storage, but it's run by professionals. If your laptop breaks, what's happened to all your data? I trust these providers to back up my data quite well. So it's different risks rather than one of these methods having no risks. It's just differences. Lost my train of thought now. So how much storage space do you actually get on those? Dropbox, iCloud, OneDrive, they give you a couple of gigabytes, I believe. They don't give you a huge amount unless you're paying for it. So it's easy to expand, If I wanted to use more space on my Dropbox account, then I just need to give them money. And then suddenly I've got lots more storage space. So it's a limited amount of free space, but then the option to expand based on however much I want to pay them. Okay, so let's look at the advantages and disadvantages. So with your magnetic storage, your hard drives, they're huge. Compared to everything else, they can store the most. They're quite fast. Your hard drive, it quite often runs, so the operating system and all the rest, it's doing quite a good job. It's getting there quite fast. Solid state, however, is really fast. This is where you may, on a decent setup, you may find that you've got a small solid state drive which holds the stuff which you want really fast access to, and then a hard drive for everything else. That's what I've got. So I've got my operating system and my games installed on solid state, and then I've got all my files and media and everything else on a magnetic storage. As we discussed with sort of jogging, no moving parts on solid state is really good, whereas the optical and magnetic have moving parts. That can also mean that you get more wear and tear. Where something's spinning, you got ball bearings and you got things which can break. Magnetic storage is not good with movement. It's also not good with magnets, funnily enough. There was the tale of someone having issues with their computers and it just having random mess up, and they'd call IT. IT would come and collect the computer, take it back to their lab, they'd rebuild it, then reinstall it back again, work fine for a couple of days, and then it would start showing glitches again. After this happened about 3 times, they said, how come after a few days your computer always then starts to mess up? And the person said, well, I usually wait a couple of days to see whether it's working properly again before I put my fridge magnet collection on it. Not realizing fridge magnets, loads of magnets on a computer, particularly the hard drive, and remember the iron filings? What happens when you just jam a magnet near it? It doesn't behave well. Anyway, with magnetic, you can see that the typical size, they're larger than all the others. You can get the most capacity for the size. Optical storage, your CDs, really cheap, tend just to be right at once. You can get rewritables and all fancy things, but we're mainly concerned with the fact that they're right once, because to be honest, rewritables have gone out of fashion with the rise of USB flash drives. So you tend to write something once, like a movie or a CD, and then you can hand that out, and it's really good because it's cheap. If you write a compilation CD to a disc and give that to a mate, chances are you're not overly fussed if they don't give it back. It is slow because it does need to spin up and find the data. You've got that one spiral of information, remember. So a CD is about 700 meg, DVD is about 4.7 gig, and a Blu-ray is about 25 gig. So you've got more space on each of those, which means you can do higher quality. Solid states are getting a lot more cost effective. You can get sort of 256 gig, even more these days. It is more expensive to get something comparable to magnetic storage, but it is getting there, so it's really coming into its own. And cloud storage, I had a quick look online, and you can get a 2 gigabyte Dropbox account for free. You can get a 5 gigabyte OneDrive account for free. If you're part of the school, then you've got a OneDrive account linked to that, which is a great way to store your homework. Then you don't have the excuse of, oh yeah, I left my homework at home. if it's on OneDrive, you can access it in school and then print it off. There's not really any excuses, but maybe that's the problem. Okay, so what could you be asked on these? What are the main things which you need to take away? Well, you need to be able to say, okay, what are the advantages of this over that? What's the advantages of magnetic storage over optical storage? What's the advantage of solid state over magnetic? What's the advantage of cloud over this, that, or the other? You may get a question like, so-and-so is trying to do this. They're trying to give some files to their friends. What storage type should they use? They're trying to back up some stuff. What should they use? So you need to be able to answer that sort of question. You also need a bit of a technical explanation. How is data stored on a CD? How is data stored on a hard drive? That sort of thing. How does secondary storage differ to RAM? So we were sort of saying about it being RAM's volatile. Secondary storage is non-volatile. It's slower, but it doesn't all vanish the minute you turn off your computer. You could be asked to do an essay, sort of maybe the ethics of cloud storage. Is cloud storage a good thing or a bad thing? And you could just be asked to compare, okay, how does this compare to that? And then you just got advantages, disadvantages. Some of those may be sort of, the cloud storage one could be a long essay. The other ones may be a short essay. Or you may just get state 2 advantages, that sort of thing. So I hope that gives you an idea on secondary storage. Please do some further reading. YouTube has Lewis Rossman videos on taking apart a hard drive and recovering the data, which is awesome. BBC Bite Size, as always, is great. Ask any questions if you need to. You know where I am. Take care.